Hey guys, Albin here. Now, this is something that I haven't ever really done on this channel, or anywhere, really. I was talking to Danny a few days back, aka DJ Icewolf, and my boyfriend. We were brainstorming different story elements and ideas, nothing too unusual, when the topic of originality came up. This certainly isn't the first time that we've talked about this, but after I started bringing up different points and opinions, he told me I'd be able to make a pretty good rant video on the topic. I wasn't too sure at first, but I figured I'm gonna give it a shot. After all, it is something that tends to pop up quite often when I'm talking to people online, especially when those people are content creators who have their own stories that they want to tell. So without further ado, welcome to my lovely little rant about originality. Anyone who's been through the process of writing a screenplay, a script, or a novel has dealt with this at least once. We're always going to have doubts in our minds that, oh, this is too similar to so-and-so, some other random franchise or series. And I have yet to come across an independent animator or storyteller who posts their story on YouTube and doesn't have a crap ton of people in the comments comparing their series to something else and claiming that it's quote-unquote unoriginal. This video is mainly addressed to those people. I know I can't speak for every content producer out there, but I'll try to get some of the basics out of the way. Please remember that nothing I say here is an attempt to put words in someone else's mouth or strawman a bunch of counterpoints. I'm quite literally just another guy who wants to throw their 2 bits in on the topic. Firstly, I'd like to get a few of my personal thoughts and experiences out there. Bear in mind that this is not designed to be the most objective thing in the world here. Although I'm a voice actor first and foremost, I'm also a writer. Torched is a primary example, but it's certainly not the only thing that I've written. Every story that I've written, whether it's for school or for personal expression, I've had to go through a rigorous process in pre-writing where I shoot down idea after idea because they sound too similar to something that's already made. I know I'm not the only one. The last thing a writer wants is to have their series be nothing but a copy of something everyone else has already seen. Not only could they be accused of plagiarism, which may or may not land them in serious legal trouble, but what's more, no one is going to want to see their content if they already saw something that was basically the same thing. You're not going to buy a book that's just like the one you already read before. Any good storyteller is going to put a lot of time and thought into making sure their story is unique. That's one of the things that I felt proud of with Torched because it felt unique, something that hadn't been done before. Even still though, I'm writing every single page and wondering if one of the characters or plot points could be compared to something else. Part of the reason why is because I've seen comparisons happen all too often online. By comparisons, I'm not talking about little things like, oh, this reminds me of this, or this style is sort of like that other thing. I mean people commenting or blatantly calling out someone else's series for taking ideas or even outright copying another. While there are certainly cases where this is true, the vast majority of the time, it's not. It's mostly people making claims that on the surface may seem viable, but they completely start to fall apart once you look deeper into what writing a story actually entails. So just so we all have a base example, I'll use something I'm sure people are familiar with here on the YouTube animation scene. Warriors. I can't imagine how many series have been compared to that franchise. Personally, I've really enjoyed reading the books. I've read about to the 4th arc, I believe. And it certainly isn't hard to see why it became so popular in internet culture. But because of its popularity, a large portion of a channel's viewers are likely to have read it, and therefore are more likely to see similarities between Warriors and whatever original series the channel may be putting out. There's nothing wrong with similarities. In fact, it may be entirely impossible to avoid them. But a similarity doesn't imply a series is copying another. That is what a lot of these accusations fail to understand. One of the more obvious examples is, oh, your series has cats in it, so it must be like Warriors. It doesn't take much to realize why this is just plain stupid. Warriors doesn't have a patent on cats. No one does. I mentioned how some of the unoriginality accusations seem solid at first, but this example is obviously not one of those, and it's not these stupid sort of claims that I'm here to talk about. These seemingly valid claims that I am here to talk about are often more focused on the plotline and events in a given original series. No one in the right mind is going to accuse you of copying a series simply because the characters happen to be the same species of animal as something else. But when you start to see similarities between the plots of the 2 series, it's easy to jump to conclusions and say it's unoriginal. After all, the plot is what makes a story unique, and it is arguably the most important part of one. Let's take this example. I have a story pitch to share with you all. It goes like this. We're in a fantasy world with elves and dwarves and the like. The main character is a guy named Drayden who lives in a small village and has a peaceful life. One day he finds a strange necklace that when worn grants him special powers. Suddenly the village elder comes to him, asking where the necklace was found. Upon further examination, it's discovered that the necklace is actually an ancient artifact of unmatched power, and by wearing it, Drayden has awoken an ancient evil and has to make a treacherous journey to the edge of the bottomless skycliff and toss the necklace off, effectively destroying the artifact and vanquishing the evil. It's pretty obvious at this point that this story is a blatant ripoff of Lord of the Rings, but the characters are different and it's a necklace instead of a ring. It doesn't matter. The plot, the core of the story, stays the same. No matter how much you change the characters or the details, you're still just writing an alternate universe fanfiction for Lord of the Rings. But what if I pitch you the idea like this? Our main character lives a simple life, but when he finds himself caught up in the folds of a growing conflict, he has no choice but to make a journey to defeat the evil and save the world. Now it becomes much harder to say that I'm just copying Lord of the Rings. In fact, it's just as easy to compare it to The Matrix or even Star Wars. Why? Because I've stripped the outline of my crappy story down to an archetype. For anyone who doesn't know, archetypes are a set of common formats or molds that something can follow. Plot archetypes are one such example. Almost all plots follow one of a dozen or so common archetypes. Some people say it's like 7. It can vary depending on who you ask. The one I'm using in this example is called the journey archetype. When I stripped down my Lord of the Rings copy, I made it so generic that it could be compared to any other story that follows the same archetype. It obviously shares archetypes with Lord of the Rings, but also with Star Wars and The Matrix. However, no one would have called my original story pitch a copy of Star Wars. Even though they all shared archetypes, the major plot points of my story, the ancient artifact, the fantasy world, or destroying the artifact in some faraway place, were only shared with Lord of the Rings. But because my story, Lord of the Rings, and Star Wars all share the same archetype, there's still very broad and unspecific similarities between the three. I.e., you can compare Neo from The Matrix, Luke Skywalker from Star Wars, and Frodo in Lord of the Rings. You can compare them all to the same character. They're not a hero at first, but then they become one and they have to make a journey and fight something that they might not have even known existed. The thing is, none of these plots will share much with a story from a completely different archetype, i.e. like a horror story where a group of campers is hunted by a killer in the woods, since that would be the monster in the house archetype, a completely different one from the journey. This is what so many of these accusations of unoriginality fail to understand, the idea of an archetype. It is absolutely acceptable to use the same archetype as another series. It's actually incredibly difficult to not do so, and sticking to an archetype is advisable because it's an archetype for a reason. They present a scenario that has been proven time and time again to be interesting and captivating to the audience in a story. It is not okay to take unique key elements from a story and use them in your own. This might be a bit of a gray area in some cases, but certain things are rather straightforward. Lord of the Rings has its iconic ring of power that must be destroyed. The Matrix has, well, the Matrix, where everyone is trapped in a digital world and they believe it to be real. Taking something like this will stand out like a sore thumb, no matter how much you alter the details. Even though my story had a necklace instead of a ring, it was still the ring of power from Lord of the Rings because I changed nothing else about it. Let's take this back to that Warriors example. What would be a copy of Warriors? Having a house pet meet and eventually join their feral counterparts only to discover one of their supposed allies is actually trying to overthrow the leader and killing anyone in their way. This is incredibly similar to Warriors' plot. Someone tell me how to pronounce that. And unless there are significant deviations that set it apart, it's more likely than not a copy. What wouldn't be a copy of Warriors? Having the main character join a clan and being forced time and time again to prove themselves worthy to their allies. As time goes on, they begin to realize that the clan isn't the righteous and altruistic group they claim to be, and the protagonist is forced to decide if they want to remain in the clan or fight against it, either from the inside or out. This has the same base archetype as Warriors, but the significant details of the plot are different. I don't care if the main character is a cat named Rusty, the story is still not Warriors, though if the character was actually a cat named Rusty, I'd be tempted to call it a fanfiction or alternate universe of Warriors. Anyway, the point is, there's a huge difference between sharing archetypes and sharing plot details, and the distinction between the two needs to be made before calling out anyone for copying a series. Just because the characters are a part of a clan or a pack doesn't instantly mean it's a copy of Warriors. It might sound like this goes without saying, but animators especially are still getting ridiculous amounts of this sort of stuff in their comments section of their original series they've put insane amounts of work and time into. Eventually, that sort of response can wear someone down, and for people to constantly be telling them that their story is nothing but a ripoff is incredibly asinine, especially when the story is, in actuality, something that they've made completely on their own. With archetypes out of the way, the second point I'd like to discuss is the idea of inspiration. If archetypes have their own fair share of gray area when it comes to what's copying and what's not, inspiration takes that to a whole new level. Of course, there's no objective answer to the question of originality. The law defines copyright infringement as the two pieces of media being similar enough so that they are indistinguishable from one another, but even that's subjective. In terms of story writing, a completely 100% original idea is basically a myth at this point. Ever since people started telling stories, it's become obvious that we can only write so many of them before they start to share traits with ones that have already been written. The solution? Writers started to take bits and pieces of what they had seen all through their lives and combine them in new ways. This happened both consciously and subconsciously. It could be argued that the idea of an archetype is just that, taking the time-tested structure that's been used for millennia and applying your own inspiration. That doesn't make your story a copy, though. Inspiration is not inherently unoriginality. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that every single modern creator has been inspired by someone else's previous work. Consequently, the things they create are, in a sense, all the bits and pieces of their previous experiences, including both their life and inspirations, rearranged into a new product. For example, the novel Dracula, besides being, the Dracula, is well known for its motifs of dark, oppressing atmosphere and being trapped. If someone reads Dracula and enjoys these themes, they're more than able to incorporate them into their own story. Both works are still original in their own right, it's just that the author of the second story happened to be inspired by the previous one and used some of its themes. Saying dark theme does not necessarily imply specific plot points, and as long as those details are not ripped straight from one source to the next, the story remains original. This also applies to characters. You know how I talked about plots following one or more pre-existing archetypes? Well, guess what? Characters do the same thing. The same logic applies to both. Just because a character in one story shares a few or even several base traits with another stories, that doesn't instantly mean one is a copy of the other. And please don't even get me started on shared names. If a character happens to have the same name as someone else, who the hell cares? There's only so many names out there, and even if you come up with one on your own, no matter how unique it is, it's likely someone else has or will come up with the same name completely independently from you. We're not trying to make Twitter handles here. We don't have to add 7 digits of numbers to the end of a character's name just to make absolutely sure it's unique. Anyways, regarding inspiration and plot, the same can be said of characters more or less. Elements of a character from one story may be used as a trait in another, so long as the rest of the character's buildup is different enough to make them unique. Like I've said, a lot of the things I said about plots with archetypes and inspiration are also applicable when discussing the originality of characters. So I won't go too much further into this since it's already been said. It'd be kind of redundant to repeat everything, but I still wanted to mention it just because character comparisons are something I see almost as often as plot comparisons when people try to accuse someone of copying. One final topic before I end this off, I wanted to remind everyone that coincidences still can and do happen. It's easy to look at one particular aspect of a story and see similarities to something else, but if that one detail is the only thing the stories share, then you might want to stop and consider if it was really a copy or just a coincidence. One detail shouldn't be all it takes to start throwing accusations. For example, Danny, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is creating his original series, The Chosen. And like many animators, the comments section has no shortage of comments comparing his series to other things. One comment in particular compared it to Green Lantern of all things, on the basis that in Danny's series, there exist element shards, each one residing within a character. After said character dies, the shards seek out a new host. To the commenter, this sounded similar to the way the Lanterns in Green Lantern sought out hosts in their series. While these two details are similar in some aspects, this doesn't mean Danny's series is a copy. For one thing, Danny hadn't even known about this prior to the comment, but more importantly, the fact that this is the only detail to be shared by the two stories makes the conclusion of it being a coincidence vastly more plausible, logical, and reasonable than the unfounded claim that his series is unoriginal. This is only one example, yes, but I bring this up more as a proof of concept more than anything else. Coincidences happen more than you think. Well, I'm going to cut myself off before this starts becoming dragged out. Thanks for listening, and I hope this helped clear some things up. If you have things you'd like to add or just want to share some of your own thoughts and experiences on this topic, feel free to post them down in the comments. I might be revisiting this subject in a future video, but I think this is all I'll say for now. Hopefully we can make things a bit less stressful for all the creators on this site. It's the least we can do for them. Albin Solstice, signing off. Thank you.